NHL semifinals is all set. And it is going to be 3 of the 4 same teams from last year's semifinals. And what's interesting, too, is that was the maximum that it could be, because the Lightning and the Stars are in the same division this year, so only one could have made it out of that. So, yeah, you could not have had 4 for 4, but you get the 3 in the Islanders, Lightning, and Golden Knights, plus the Montreal Canadiens coming out of the North Division. So, yeah, this is going to be interesting. And a lot of themes where depth is just critical. I can't state enough how important depth is. Also, having big physical defensemen seems to be important as well. It's just the war of attrition, staying healthy. Being able to ice a team that is representative of kind of what you wanted it to be going into the playoffs, because, I mean, you lose those players, it could really take a toll on a team, and we've seen that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's the obvious goaltending and, things of that sort, but really it's lines 3 and 4 can make a really big impact. And just to jump right into it, the East second round matchup between the Bruins and the Islanders, this was a series where I predicted Bruins in 7. What's interesting is for both Islanders series, I predicted the Penguins in 7, which looking back on, I regret. And then I had Bruins in 7, and we never actually saw that come to fruition. It would have been very interesting to see what Game 7 would have brought. I think those could have been very interesting games, in the facts that the Islanders, even though the results wouldn't show it, have played a much better brand of hockey at the Coliseum. They have not played as well on the road, but yet have come up with some very clutch, mostly overtime wins on the road. And the key in the theme of those Islanders series, when I look back on it, is those Game 5s in Pittsburgh, in Boston, where, quite frankly, the Islanders got dominated in both of the, maybe not dominated, outplayed, but they were able to come away with victories for different reasons. And then they were able to play what I feel was one of their better games, the Game 6s. Both Game 6s, I feel like, were 2 of the better games they played this playoffs. Pittsburgh and Boston let the Islanders kind of hang around. And I think it was key for the Islanders to get those splits in games 1 and 2 in both. So, yeah, a lot of similar themes. Like for the Islanders, they were down 2-1 in both and then won 4-5 and 6. And as I was watching the East Division this year, and obviously as a Ranger fan, that was the division I was mostly tuned into, I kept on saying, I don't know if the Islanders will win the division, and they didn't. I wasn't sure about that, but I felt like they were going to come out of the East. And then I kind of backed off that just because, I guess for a few reasons. Like if it had been Islander Capital second round, I would have predicted Islanders. No doubt. And if it had been, Islanders, Bruins, with the way Boston had played against Washington, the way they had been playing down the stretch, it just felt like with that perfection line that Boston could get it done. And it looked that way early in the series. Game 1, Pasternak gets a hat trick. Game 2, they also get a lot of production out of that top line, and they tied up in the third. They were down 3-1 going into that third period, tied up, and then a random puck off the skate, I believe it went off of maybe Coyle from Lauzon, gets onto the stick of Casey Cizikas, and he scores a huge breakaway goal to tie the series up. If Boston makes it 2-0 there, who knows where the rest of the series goes? Then in Game 3, Brad Marchand wins it in overtime to give Boston a 2-1 series lead. But what was key was that Matt Barzal scored a goal in the third, and he hadn't really done much of anything to that point, but it got him going. And he, in Game 4, would score a big goal, another puck off the skate of Coyle to Barzal, who scores what would be the game winner in the third period. And so the Islanders win that Game 4 just as they did against Pittsburgh the series previously. Then in Game 5 in Boston, Pasternak scores early. And just to be noted, Rask played the whole series for Boston, and he was banged up, and they probably should have went to Swayman at some point, honestly. but they went with the veteran Rask. That wasn't the reason why they lost, but I think they probably should have turned to Swayman. Sorokin was in for game one, and then that was it. So Sorokin, kind of one of the heroes of the first series, would lose game one, and then Varlamov would play the rest of the second round series. In game five, Boston scores early. Pasternak, I believe, gives the Bruins 1-0 lead, and then Marchand almost scores. I don't know how it didn't go in. It did not give them a 2-0 lead, and the Islanders tied up in the first. The power play would be great for the Islanders in that game five. Eventually, they would take a 5-2 lead, and then Boston would actually make it 5-4, but the Islanders would hold on. They were outshot 44-19, the Islanders, and scored 5 goals. It is, I think it's a credit to Trotz's system, but on the other hand, it's hard to kind of fathom. But then game 6, Islanders were the better team. And what should be noted is that Brandon Carlo gets hurt in game 3. This was a gigantic loss for Boston. Brandon Carlo, after they had already lost Kevin Miller in the Washington series, they were rolling guys out on defense that just weren't up to snuff. It wasn't great. I mean, they had Mike Riley playing big minutes. They had Jeremy Lauzon playing big minutes. They had Jarrett already playing. It was just bad. It was just simply bad. And game 6 would be just goals, a lot of goals from Palmieri, a lot of goals from Brock Nelson. That depth from the Islanders was a lot better than the depth from Boston. I mean, maybe, and Brad Marchand was just unbelievably good. And Pasternak had his moments, of course, certainly stat-wise. I thought Bergeron, there was a little bit more that he could have brought, but the second line was okay for Boston, just in comparison. Like David Krejci was all right, had some goals. Taylor Hall, probably not good enough. I'd almost say definitely not good enough. And Craig Smith, that line had some moments, but the third and fourth line did nothing at all. The Charlie Coyle line did absolutely nothing. That fourth line that had, Corrali and Chris Wagner, just nothing. The Islander depth was way better than Boston's, plain and simple. And the Islanders win. They find a way again to win it in 6. And again, the keys for me when I look back at those game 5s in Pittsburgh and Boston, they just were not able to get it done when they were the better team. And then the Islanders just knew the importance of winning 6. The Islanders knew. They didn't want to go back to game 7. They didn't want that. And they were able to get it done in 6. So Hurricanes Lightning. My prediction here was Lightning in 6. It ends up being Lightning in 5. And I felt like I got this series pretty much right. I think a lot of people had the Hurricanes actually winning this series, or maybe you'd get a lot of Lightnings in 7. I'd also say Lightning in 5, it was closer than that. These were close games. These were all close games. But the Lightning ability to win on the road, and what's interesting is that the Lightning were the road team, quote unquote, for the first 2 series. They will have home ice advantage in this semifinals against the Islanders, and who knows, maybe you'd rather not have home ice. Again, I think if it goes to game 7, it can make a difference, but if it doesn't get there, then of course it doesn't matter. But Tampa wins a couple of 2-1. The thing with Tampa is they can beat you by scoring goals, particularly on the power play. That power play is lethal, but they can win low scoring games. They won 2-1 in games 1 and 2 at Carolina. Then Carolina did what Florida did to Tampa in the first round, which was win in overtime in Tampa in game 3. So it's 2-1. And then Tampa was down 4-2 to Carolina in game 4. And then they just go on a surge at the end of the second period. I believe the goals were scored by Kucherov, Johnson, and Stamkos, something to that effect, to give them a 5-4 lead. That second period was wild. It was 1-0 Tampa going to the second. And yeah, so there were how many goals? 8 goals in that second period. And then Tampa scores another goal in the third, and they win 6-4. Go up 3-1, just as they did against the Panthers. Then in game 5, they had lost to Florida in game 5, they would actually win this one. Shutout. 2-0. Let's talk about this series a little bit and then get right into the preview for Islanders Lightning. But for Tampa, a pretty impressive showing. That depth is coming through for them. They're relatively healthy. Victor Hedman is banged up. There's no doubt that Victor Hedman is banged up, and that's no small thing. So the Islanders are going to try to hit him and get him off his game and maybe injure. I mean, not in a dirty way, but maybe try to further that injury. this is going to be an extremely interesting series. A rematch of last year's semifinals. I think that the Islanders, they're going to be ready. They've wanted this moment. They've wanted this rematch. And there's going to be differences from last year, good and bad, for both teams, where I think with the Islanders, I think this is a better – it's tough to say. I think that this is in some ways a better Islander team. Like in some ways not, in some ways yes. Like I think that they have a healthy squad at the moment. Like I feel like last year they were a bit banged up by the time they got there. I believe Cizikas was banged up, Pelech was banged up. They did have a healthy Anders Lee, but Anders Lee, as important of a loss as that is, the fact that he's been gone for so long now, they know what, like, the players are in a set role. It's different. When you get an injury on the fly in the playoffs, it is a lot different. They've had a long time to prepare for this. And so if everything is set up and the Islanders don't get any more injuries, they're in a good spot in that way. Good goaltending tandem, a solid defensive core, and a lot of depth forward-wise. For Tampa, you could argue that they're actually better this year than last. Steven Stamkos wasn't even a factor last year. Braden Point was hurt. The two games the Islanders won last year were when Braden Point was out. You lose Shattenkirk, but I'd argue that while he helps on the offensive side, he kind of hurts on the defensive side. So in a way, I guess Dennis Savard maybe takes over that role. It's tough to fully say on a one-for-one basis, but again, Tampa, it's pretty much in other ways, besides Stamkos, which is huge, it's a similar team to last year. They have that continuity. They have that cup-winning feel. This is going to be a really good series. It's definitely going to go at least 6 or 7. There's no doubt about that. And I just think that it's going to be key for the Islanders to stay out of the box. Again, this Tampa power play is lethal. If they can stay out of the box, they'll have some success. And I've seen the Islanders, they're going to scrape out wins. It's just, even when they don't play well, it happens. But logically, I look at this and I have to take Tampa. Tampa is just so loaded, but look out for the fact that maybe the Islanders bruise them up a bit, bang them up a bit, and maybe they lose players. Like I did mention that going to this Boston preview series was, and that proved to be important. Brandon Carlo was a top 4 at worst guy for the Bruins. They lost him, and they were kind of a little done after that, at least on the defensive side. But I'm going to go Tampa in 7. So that's probably a good thing for the Islanders because I've picked against the Islanders each time. And again, I go back and I look on it with regret with Pittsburgh. Although, to be fair, if they had anyone besides Tristan Jarry, I honestly don't know what would have happened. He was a huge reason for that loss. I mean, I got to go Tampa in 7. I think it goes at least 6 or 7, and I respect the Islanders enough to say that it goes 7. The key for Tampa, I cannot state this enough, either going up 2-0, because the Islanders have been able to – Tampa has gone up 2-0 in both of their series, and the Islanders have been able to split both of theirs. That's going to be huge. The Islanders split the first 2. They're looking pretty solid. Tampa wins the first 2. They're in really good shape. And then another key is if it hits Game 5 and it's 2-2 or just whatever it is, Tampa has got to be up 3-2 going into Game 6. I cannot say that enough, where those Game 5s that were lost were critical. They can't go down 3-2 going back to the Coliseum for Game 6. They have to have the Coliseum basically be a house money situation in Game 6. And if you lose it, okay, we're going back home for Game 7. So either be up 2-0 or be up 3-2. You got a good situation on your hands at that point. If not, the Islanders are going to take advantage of that. So, it's going to be a really interesting series. That's for sure. Let's move on to the West and the North. So, Avalanche Golden Knights. This looked like Colorado looked like they were going to basically bulldoze their way to a Stanley Cup. They had won the first game 7-1. Keep in mind, Vegas was coming off of that Minnesota series where Minnesota took them to 7. So Vegas, it was a quick turnaround. They just weren't ready to go. Then in game 2, it was a tough loss. It was a loss in overtime at Colorado. Rantanen with the winner in overtime. So it's 2-0 Colorado in the series at this point. And so Colorado wins the first 6 straight games in the playoffs. And it's looking like, all right, Colorado, they're probably destined for at least making the final. But Vegas, they're just more battle tested than Colorado. Got a little. I mean, to me, they're like the Islanders West. They are like the Islanders West. Maybe a slightly better version of, like, there's the Mark Stones of the world, and they have, of course, that line since the inception of Vegas, the Riley Smith, Carlson, Marchessault line. And then Max Pacioretty's done wonders for Vegas since his acquisition from Montreal. But they remind me of the Islanders. Very opportunistic. You make mistakes against the Islanders in Vegas, and they're going to make you pay. So Vegas, in Game 3, they are down 2-1 late, like 5 minutes left or so. Colorado's like close to taking a 3-0 series lead. But then a big clutch tying goal by Marchessault. And then they would get, I believe it was Pacioretty. Yeah, pretty sure it was Pacioretty who would give Vegas a 3-2 lead, which they would keep. So Vegas absolutely had to win the game, and they did. So that would make it a 2-1 series. Then Game 4, Vegas takes care of business. The final score was 5-1, which I think may have been a little bit misleading. But they were the better team. Vegas was absolutely the better team. They win that game 2-2. So we go to Game 5 in Colorado. The home teams had won each game at this point, and Colorado's up 2-0 going to the third. A terrible goal by Marc-Andre Fleury at the end of the first period on a goal by Brandon Saad with 0.8 seconds left. And then Jonas Donskoy scores at the end of the second. And so you have yourselves a 2-0 Colorado lead. But then in the third, early, Alex Tuch scores, and then Marchessault makes it 2-2. And it goes to overtime. And right away, I believe it was Ryan Graves, a former Ranger prospect, who the Rangers traded away, and he has had good success with Colorado, but this was a brutal series for Ryan Graves. And Sam Girard, by the way, who just undersized defenseman, really got taken advantage of. Mark Stone, captain of Vegas, gets a kind of a mini breakaway and scores against Philip Grubauer, and it's that all-important road 2-2 series Game 5 win to give Vegas that 3-2 series lead headed back home. And Game 6, this was a fantastic series. It lived up to the hype, other than there not being a Game 7. So Vegas would give up an early goal. Former Islander Devon Taves would make it 1-0 Colorado. But then this was kind of a back-and-forth affair. As former Ranger, Nick Holden. So actually, there's only 2 former Rangers left in the playoffs to my knowledge, and that is Nick Holden of Vegas and Ryan McDonough of Tampa. Nick Holden scores to tie it up at 1. And then it would be William Karlsson that would make it 2-1. Then I think it was a power play goal by Rantanen to tie it up at 2. Then Kolesar, again, fourth liner for Vegas, makes it 3-2. Burakovsky ties up at 3. So you can see back and forth. And then late in the second, Tuch takes a shot, goes off the boards, caroms to Alex Pietrangelo, the former captain of the Blues, who scores with like less than 20 seconds left in the period, and they would hold it. As William Carrier, another fourth liner, makes it 5-3 for Vegas, and they would add an empty net goal. They would win it 6-3. So Vegas, in similar fashion to the Islanders, but even more impressive, they were down 2-0, and they were so close to losing Game 3. Colorado was about to go up 3-0 in the series, and Colorado was about to go up 3-2 in the series, and Vegas at every turn did what they needed to do. And so Vegas, who last year reached Vegas, they're just, as far as Vegas and Colorado are concerned, they're just a step ahead. They just are. Where Colorado got knocked out in the second round last year, Colorado has not, in the McKinnon era, they have not, which is or Landeskog era, whatever you want to call it, they have reached the second round a few times, but they cannot get past that point. Whereas Vegas reached the final in 2018, lost in an extremely tough fashion against San Jose in a very controversial way in the first round in 2019. 2020 loses to the Stars in the Western Conference Final, and now they're back in the semifinals, as they call it this year. So Vegas, I think, are in a good position, not to discredit, but now they're going to be facing Montreal. Easier road for Vegas than Tampa. Islanders are going to be a tough out for Tampa. I think Montreal, we'll see, Montreal's won 7 straight games. They were down 3-1 to Toronto, have won 7 straight. I have gotten this division complete, whereas I feel like I've had a sense, to varying degrees, to be honest, of the other divisions, not fully there at all. The North, I have no idea what goes on. None. I picked Winnipeg to win this series in 6, and I should mention, I picked Colorado to win that series in 7. I was wrong. It, again, didn't reach that 7th game, and that's the key. In those closeouts, it's nice to have that, in that clinching situation, it's nice to have that home game. So, Montreal sweeps. There's not a whole lot to say in this series, although what would be really big, the moment of this series was Game 1. Game 1, Montreal wins 5-3, but Mark Scheifele would be called for a charging penalty, a major, as Jake Evans scores an empty net goal but gets just completely crushed by Scheifele. It's a 4-game suspension, and that was it. That was it for Winnipeg. Scheifele was out, and they were pretty much no-shows. Honestly, they couldn't score. They really didn't defend all that well. They were dominated. Carey Price, as good as he was, wasn't even tested all that much. So that was the moment of the series, and Montreal rallied around Evans and just took him out. So Game 2, 1-0 Montreal wins on a Tyler Toffoli short-handed goal in the second period. They go back to Montreal. Game 3, Montreal dominates them 5-1. Game 4, Winnipeg shows a little bit of fight. Logan Stanley, a depth defenseman for Winnipeg, scores a couple of goals to tie it up. And it doesn't matter, as I believe it was Toffoli, gets the game-winning goal in overtime to give Montreal the series win, the sweep. They win it 3-2 in that game. And let me just confirm here. I believe that it was Toffoli, and yeah, it was, who was a huge acquisition. So now that leads us to Vegas-Montreal. So that's interesting in terms of Max Pacioretty. And I think, I'm not positive, I think Nick Suzuki was in that trade that sent him from Vegas to Montreal. I think he was a Vegas draft pick. So that's an interesting storyline, but it's a weird one. I mean, Montreal, you do get that original 6 team. And so I guess they would be more interesting than Winnipeg. They would be. I do think that, like Toronto and Edmonton, there would have been some more juice with them, but it could be worse. Montreal, there is some appeal there. But I think Vegas wins this. Whereas Tampa Islanders, I kind of see as like more in the 6-7 game series variety. I think this is more like a 5 or 6 game series. I'll say 6. I'll say Vegas in 6, because Montreal has been playing really well. And so, yeah, like, I think you're probably looking at a Vegas-Tampa series. Would I be shocked if it's Vegas-Islanders? No. So this should be interesting. This will be the first time all season where there will be teams playing against each other for the first time. No more divisional play. So kind of expect the unexpected. These should be a couple of interesting series, and then what should be definitely an interesting series, especially if Vegas makes it through. If Vegas makes it through to the Stanley Cup final, in particular Tampa, Vegas, but Vegas Islanders also, like I said, that'll be a really interesting matchup just because I think they're so similar. But yeah, so there it is. And looking forward to what should be a unique Stanley Cup semifinals.